What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is the 2022 Jeep Grand Cherokee. So about the Grand Cherokee for 2022, well, it's entirely new this year. It's on a brand new platform, brand new generation. So last year they revealed the Jeep Grand Cherokee L, which is the first three-row Grand Cherokee, which is about 11.5 inches longer for only about $1,500 more expensive. But this is the two-row shorter one here, and although it's a little bit smaller, it still has grown compared to the last Grand Cherokee. So it's about 3.5 inches longer overall than it was previously, although they have lowered it a tiny bit. You also have a lower belt line, so you have larger windows, better visibility, but otherwise, you know, the width and all that is about the same as what it was before. But as far as the styling changes go, obviously it's very evolutionary, but I think it's a nice evolution of what you had with the previous Grand Cherokee. So up front there, this is the Summit Reserve, so you have a little bit more of this satin chrome appearance than you would get on other Grand Cherokees, but you'll see it in the grille there, which is a new design and a little bit more angular than before. You also have these new headlights that are all LED and look great. And you also will see you have a classier look up front there, but it still has a good amount of ground clearance, and you can get up to 11.3 inches of ground clearance in Grand Cherokees, depending on which trim you're going for. But overall, I still think it's a really handsome look up front there, especially considering they really lengthened the hood. That's where it got most of its extra length. And so it just gives it some pretty cool proportions here that are a little bit fresher than what you had with the previous generation. Coming down to the sides here, I also really like there's a lot to take in here as well. So you have 21-inch wheels, first off, which are massive here, but that is the biggest wheels you can get here, again, in this fully loaded Summit Reserve we're looking at here. But you can, of course, get smaller wheels, thicker sidewalls, all that if you'd like. But I really love how you can see you have an optional two-tone treatment here with a black roof, which I think looks really good, especially here with this velvet red pearl color. But otherwise, I love this body line. You can see that runs all the way down the sides, and you can see how it all flows right into those taillights there in the back. And you also will see how the roof is tapered a little bit more here on these new ones, and that's kind of got a cool treatment as well with the black portion. It doesn't quite meet the actual body line there, but gets close, and is a cool little floating roof design. So that's all cool. But out back, I also love how, again, those taillights are nice and slim, very modern looking. I do wish they would have connected the dots all the way through the middle there and had one full width LED strip there. And instead it kind of ends there, but maybe on the refresh version they'll have that or something. But overall, I think compared to the last generation Grand Cherokee, this is a really nice upgrade and really modernizes the look of the Grand Cherokee here. All right, so to start up and go for a drive, the new Grand Cherokee has a new Jeep key. So it's just a nice, substantial feeling key here. A little bit on the big side, but not too bad, and just a few buttons there on the back. But of course, it is keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. Also, if you're curious to hear about the interior in the 2022 Grand Cherokee, my wife and I did a full in-depth interior review on this vehicle, so I'll link that above. You can go watch that if you want to hear all our thoughts on this interior. Overall, it's very impressive. It kind of picks up with, you know, what the new Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer have been doing, and it's very just impressive from a visual standpoint. You know, the open pore wood here, the Palermo leather, you have screens everywhere, even a passenger display. It's all very, very impressive, and so yeah, definitely check out that video for all the details. All right, so setting off here in the 2022 Grand Cherokee. So the first thing that I've actually noticed my first few miles of driving is that the engine isn't quite as refined or as quiet as I was expecting. I know this is a Grand Cherokee and it's not supposed to really be a luxury vehicle, but whenever you're in a top trim like this one, which is almost $70,000, you do expect it to feel like a luxury SUV. And just compared to like a, you know, Mercedes GLE or something like that, I mean, this is remarkably less refined than those. It might be a little smoother if you had the optional V8, but you can get for about $3,300 extra. But this one's running the V6. And otherwise, though, all the driving inputs and stuff all feel really good. You have pretty good throttle response here for, you know, an SUV like this. Nice responsive brake pedals, steering feels nice and good. You also have great visibility here. Again, since they lowered that belt line, you have really good visibility. It's been a couple of years, admittedly, since I've been in a Grand Cherokee, but I mean, you can certainly tell that you have a better forward view, I think, and just, yeah, a little more airy overall. The panoramic moonroof certainly helps with that feeling as well. But otherwise, so this one also does have the air ride suspension, which is optional here, but it's standard once you get to these top trims. So it has a bunch of different modes. It can lower itself whenever you get in and out of the vehicle, and can give you extra ground clearance whenever you want it, all that. And so that also does have a new adaptive feature now, where it will also not only just give you different ride heights, but also actively manage the ride and try and soak up bumps a little bit better. And so we'll continue to test that out and see how that feels. But so far, it's a pretty smooth ride. Again, for something that's as rugged as this is, it's probably, again, not as polished as all of the actual luxury SUV competitors, but compared to other stuff in the non-luxury segment, I think this is totally acceptable. And once the engine quiets down, it is also pretty nice and quiet. At least you don't really have much wind noise or road noise or anything like that, so that's certainly nice. But I'm going to go ahead and put it up into the sport mode, which, believe it or not, it does have a sport mode in a Grand Cherokee here that actually lowers down the air suspension here a little bit, sharpens up throttle, steering, all that as well. But let's turn down onto this back road and see how it does. Here we go. Okay, good and responsive. Pulls nice and strong. This is the Pentastar 3.6 liter V6 engine, and it's always been a strong performer. It sounds good. It has a good amount of power. It's 293 horsepower, 260 pound-feet of torque, and so that's not going to be giving you amazing performance. I think it's about a 7.5 second 0 to 60. Again, if you want the extra power, definitely go for the V8 for $3,300 extra. You do take a fuel economy hit, but in exchange, you end up getting about 70 more horsepower and about, I think, almost 130 extra pound-feet of torque, and that'll also help you out with towing, which, by the way, these with the V6 can tow 6,200 pounds. If you get the V8, though, it's 7,200 pounds, so you get an extra 1,000 pounds of towing there. And towing is really one of the bright spots here of this. It's a little more capable just because of its platform and stuff than some of its competitors, and so really solid amount of towing. But power and stuff is fine. It runs all through an 8-speed automatic. It's the ZF 8-speed, which is a really good transmission, nice and snappy, always does what you expect it to do. I'll continue to test it, of course, during this week, but no complaints with the way it performs. Again, we're talking about a normal SUV here, nothing that's supposed to be super sporty or anything, and so it just feels pretty nice. I am noticing, though, even just doing some fairly light acceleration, that this V6 engine does feel like it has to work a tiny bit harder, because these aren't light vehicles. So this one, as tested, weighs just under 4,800 pounds. Now, depending on the trim and all the options and the all-wheel drive system you have and all that, these can range wildly in weights. They can be anywhere from like under 4,300 pounds all the way up to slightly over 5,000 pounds if you go for one of those loaded up V8 ones. So this one's definitely on the heavier side, and so the V6 has to work a little bit more than it would in some of the lighter versions. But anyway, coming up some corners here that I always take, and let's see how the Grand Cherokee handles them. So it's not bad here. It actually handles itself pretty well. So you have independent suspension front and rear. And one really cool thing is they actually mentioned that Alfa Romeo engineers helped them out with the suspension tuning, which is music to my ears, because Alfa Romeo makes some of the best handling vehicles in their segments. And so, I mean, this doesn't handle like a Stelvio or anything, but it handles itself pretty well, again, considering this thing's almost 5,000 pounds and, it has the off-road capability, the ground clearance that it has. No complaints as far as that goes. It's also worth noting you can get the L version of these Grand Cherokees, and that will give you an extra 5 inches in wheelbase length. So those might even feel a little more planted in corners because of their extra length there, but they also do tack on about 250 extra pounds, so you'll feel that in the corners as well. So again, no one's driving these like sports cars, so it's probably a moot point, but just wanted to mention it certainly does feel like it handles better than the last version, which was certainly a little more trucky in its ride. Again, this still isn't quite as good as some of the most on-road friendly SUVs out there, but especially I think this one being on the 21-inch wheels and having the normal Continental all-season tires and stuff certainly helps. Now, you can get, if you're someone who does want to buy a Grand Cherokee because you want the extra off-road capability, you can get the Trailhawk version, and that version will give you some smaller wheels, but they have the thicker sidewalls, and they're also like all-terrain tires, and those also come with skid plates, tow hooks, and you get an electronic sway bar disconnect, which is always handy if you're out off-road off-roading, and so it's nice that you can have that here. But even for regular Grand Cherokees, though, still very capable off-road. So there's 3 different four-wheel drive systems. The lower trims do come standard with rear-wheel drive still, but you can, of course, put four-wheel drive on any Grand Cherokee. But as far as the four-wheel drive systems go, there's first the Quadra-Trac 1, which is a full-time four-wheel drive system. Still will move around power depending on where it finds the most grip. But then there's also Quadra-Trac 2, which adds on a low range. So if you want to do some crawling and stuff like that, you can do that. You also have a low-speed cruise control, which will help you navigate trails a little bit easier and stuff, and hill descent control, all that kind of stuff. But then there's also a Quadra Drive 2 four-wheel drive system, and then that will add on an electronic locking rear differential. And so again, just all helping you to have the best traction possible. And so it's cool that you have all those different options. But I think for most people, even just having the regular four-wheel drive system will be totally fine, unless you're someone who needs the low range. But this top system, it's nice to have, but I'm sure it's going to be kind of overkill for most people. One last feature I want to mention that is really cool here on the 2022s with the four-wheel drive system that's new is that you have now a way to unlock the front axle, and does it automatically. But if it deems that you don't need four-wheel drive, it will automatically disconnect that, go back to rear-wheel drive, just to give you the best fuel economy possible. And as a result, because of that technology, you have identical fuel economy ratings for both the four-wheel drive and the two-wheel drive versions, because it just goes back to that two-wheel drive mode whenever you're in the light driving you do in EPA testing and stuff. And so that also will help you to have a little bit better efficiency. And now I'm out on the highway here in the Grand Cherokee, and I have the adaptive cruise control system on with the active drive assist function. And so this function allows the vehicle to help me with the steering assist here. It's not a hands-off system or anything. Supposedly there's a software update coming to have a hands-free version, but in the meantime right now it's hands-on, and it's been so far doing a pretty good job of doing the steering here for me. What I really love about the system though is that not only do you have a little indicator here in the gauge cluster, but you also have bright green lights on the corners of the gauge cluster to let you know when it's still functioning and working well. Plus on the head-up display here, I also have notification of it actually doing the steering for me here, showing that it's seeing cars ahead, that it's doing everything, and just keeping me in the loop, which is important for these systems so that you know when to take over and when not to take over, and so that it actually allows you to relax. You don't have to second guess yourself and wonder if it's actually working or not. You can just trust that once everything's green, you're good, and you still, again, keep your hands on the wheel and pay attention, but you can kind of relax and let down your guard just a tiny bit. And so far it's doing a really good job. I am going to be doing a little bit more highway driving here later this week, and so I'm going to test it out and see how it does on a longer drive. But so far it's doing a pretty good job, and you can of course turn all this stuff off. It does have all kinds of safety tech, so you can have, for example, lane departure warning, and if you want to have just a vibration on the steering wheel, you can have that, or you can have a bunch of beeps and stuff going off as well. And I like that they give you that option, because a lot of others is just idiot warning bells and lights and stuff. I like that this has some vibrations to be a little more subtle and less annoying about making those alerts for you. And everything else it has, you have blind spot monitoring, if you're a cross traffic alert, automatic emergency braking, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that stuff is also standard, although some of the more advanced stuff like this active drive assist isn't standard. That's all just part of option packages or these higher trims. And the highway driving in general here in the Grand Cherokee is pretty nice, at lower highway speeds, but still some highway speeds here. It's pretty quiet. I am pretty impressed by, I don't hear too much of the outside world. And so, it does feel very luxury appropriate in that way, just because I'm not hearing stuff as much as I do in some of the, I guess, more affordable mainstream competitors that this kind of competes with. And so I am impressed by that refinement. But anyway, that's all of my initial impressions here on the Grand Cherokee. But thanks to Jeep, I am going to have this vehicle for an entire week, so I'm going to drive around all over the place, and I'll come back and give you guys my final real-world fuel economy, as well as my thoughts on the pricing, how it compares to its competition, and anything else I noticed during my week of driving. Alright, so I've been driving the Grand Cherokee here for a week now, and I've been enjoying my time with it. I think that the engine roughness that I noted earlier, I've either gotten used to it, or it hasn't been bothering me as much as it did in the very first few miles. And this engine still is a pretty strong runner, although I still gotta say that I think, for a few $1,000s extra, having the V8 would be nice, because that is one differentiator of this over some of its competitors. And I'll talk more about the competition in a minute. But the only other little thing, so I continue to test out the active drive assist feature, since that's one of the exclusive things here of these upper trims of the Grand Cherokee, and it worked pretty well. But there was one time where it did actually let me go over the road lines, even though it was saying that it was doing the steering assist for me. So it's not totally reliable yet, and considering they're saying they want to have an update to make the system hands-free, I don't think the system is good enough yet to truly make it hands-free. Hopefully with that update, they will have more dedicated steering assist so that it's, you know, really adamant about keeping you in your lanes, because that's obviously very important. So I don't have full confidence in it still just yet, but it was a nice assistant, you know, which is still technically what it's supposed to be. You're supposed to, you know, keep your hands on the wheel and all that. It will check for all that, by the way. But, you know, still just wasn't super impressed. I don't think it's one of the best systems out there, but it's certainly, you know, is better than some as well. So kind of a 50-50 take there on that. But one thing that I wasn't crazy about as well is, so CarPlay worked flawlessly this week, which is great, because I did have issues with the infotainment system being a little bit glitchy in the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer that I was testing a few months back. Thankfully, no such glitches here in this. So either there's been an update or they're getting better at, you know, making these systems a little more solid. Because I really love this Uconnect 5 system, the way it's set up. And the wireless CarPlay is still really nice to have. But whenever there was one time where I was navigating, one cool thing is this vehicle will actually use, like if you're using Apple Maps or whatever map application you want, it will still put those directions through the head-up display and through your gauge cluster, which is rare. A lot of other companies, if you're not using their built-in navigation from the manufacturer, otherwise, like, you're completely on your own, you got to stare at the screen for all your directions and all that. So I really like that it's integrated in, and that's great. I wish more companies would do that. But the way that it was integrated wasn't perfect, because every time that this gauge cluster gives you a notification or it changes something, for example, whenever it does say, hey, there's a turn coming up next, it always retracts the gauges. And so you'll have the tach and the speedo that shrink down. It'll give you that direction, then they'll zoom back in. But there were times where it would keep going back and forth, back and forth. I wasn't doing any new turns. I was just driving down the highway, and it would just like go like zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, back and forth on its own when there was no new information. So it got a little confused there for some reason. I'm not sure why, but that's just an odd little quirk here. But that's really the extent of my complaints in the Grand Cherokee as far as the driving experience goes. But the last two things to mention are the fuel economy and the pricing. Both of those things are a little challenging to the whole Grand Cherokee proposition. So first off, fuel economy. So these are rated at 19 mpg in the city, 26 on the highway, and 22 combined. So in my driving here, now it's the winter time, so take that, you know, into consideration here, but I'm still only getting 16.3 mpg over my 90 miles of driving. Now there was a little bit of idling to film this interior and stuff like that, so that drags it down a little bit. Even if we bump it up to 17 though, I'm still 2 mpg less, which is a little bit on the low end, but typically in my testing I do end up seeing 1 to 2 mpg less than the city rating with the type of driving I'm doing, which is mostly around town, 35 mile per hour back roads, kind of suburban driving. But I did do a little bit more highway driving in this vehicle than I usually do in most others. So I was actually hoping to be a little bit better than my typical, you know, 1 to 2 mpg less. So I'm not thrilled with the fuel economy here. I mean, obviously, yes, this thing is off-road capable. It's got a, you know, V6. It's heavy. It's big. But still, with, you know, the way they tried to work on the aerodynamics for this generation, the way they tried to, you know, really improve things a lot, I was hoping for a little bit better fuel economy, honestly. But it is worth noting, if you are someone who does want better efficiency out of a Grand Cherokee, they are going to have the 4xe version here this year, and that will give you about 25 miles of all-electric range. And you know, that also runs a 2-liter turbo 4 instead of the V6, so you have a little bit of a more efficient gas engine and also have the electric range there. I was actually pretty happy with the 4xe experience in the Wrangler, so I'm optimistic it'll be really nice here in the Grand Cherokee as well. Now that comes with a price premium, but you also do get a tax credit to kind of even that out. But so keep that in mind if you do want, you know, one of these is a little more efficient. Definitely check out the 4xe here this year. But then the last thing to mention here is the pricing of the Grand Cherokee, and that is something that still is a little bit tough. So this one, as tested, is $69,760 for this Summit Reserve trim, which is basically a fully loaded, maxed out Grand Cherokee. And the one first thing I have to say right off the bat is that regardless of what Grand Cherokee you're going for, I think that you're better off spending the extra like $1,500 for the L version, because you just get a lot more room and space, and $1,500 when you're talking about something that's expensive is nothing. And unless you really want a, you know, tight parking spot, or, you know, there's some other reason why you need to have, you know, a 1 foot shorter vehicle, you know, if you don't have any good reasons for that, then I would definitely say go for the longer version. It's a good value. I think it's a better value to just have all the extra space, have the third row for $1,500 more. It's kind of a no-brainer in my opinion. But if you are someone who's insistent on the 2 rows here, I say as far as other 2-row competitors go, you know, it's kind of tough. I mean, you know, obviously, again, this is fully loaded. You have the passenger display, which no one else offers. You have this Macintosh stereo, which is fantastic. No one else offers a stereo quite like it, and I can kind of talk more about that in the interior review, but this stereo is super good, like really amazing. So, you know, you have some of those things that, you know, you can't really match even with some of the luxury competitors in some ways, but it is worth noting these start about $40,000 for the base trims, and if you want one that's a little more reasonably equipped, you know, there's like the limited and then there's the overland trims. They're kind of between like $47,000 and $55,000, which is a little more down to earth and, you know, still gives you some very nice features, although it's not quite as loaded up, of course, as this one is. But I just want to highlight, you know, there are more affordable Grand Cherokees, but even when you look at those more affordable ones, it still isn't a great value compared to a lot of the others. So whenever you're talking about other mainstream stuff, I'm talking like the, you know, like my favorites in the segment, Kia Telluride, Hyundai Palisade, stuff like that, you can get one of those right around 50 grand fully loaded. You have 3 rows of seating in those as well. You know, you still have a normal V6 engine, you still have lots of space. Obviously, everything that I'm comparing this against is going to have less off-road capability than this does, really. So, you know, that is one thing. You're going to be paying a little bit of a premium for the Jeep thing and the Jeep capability, and you got to be fully aware of that and prepared to pay that premium because, you know, but it's just worth noting that it is, you know, on the expensive side compared to some of those, which give you, you know, heated and cooled seats, all that kind of stuff right at that $50,000 price point. And with the Jeeps, you got to go up into the high 50s or low 60s usually to get some of those features here in the Grand Cherokee. So, you know, it just isn't the best value for money, and honestly, it really kind of competes with the luxury stuff. Like, you can get a nice Mercedes GLE for $70,000. You know, you can get a nice BMW X5, not a base one, like a nice, well-equipped, what most people get. Most people, you know, are driving around like $70,000 X5s, you know, very nicely equipped. And so to have, you know, this cost that much, again, there are the cool features and stuff, but the fit and finish in here is not Mercedes or BMW quality. You know, you don't have the brand prestige and stuff like that. So, you know, that's where the Jeep tax really comes in hard with the Grand Cherokees in these higher trims. And, you know, yeah, if you go without some of these, you know, super upper high-end features, and you're okay with the cheaper one, then, you know, I can see this kind of maybe making a little bit more sense. So it's one of these vehicles that's really good in a vacuum, and if you're just a Jeep fan and that's it, you know, then you won't have an issue with the price, I guess. But when you start cross-shopping this with other stuff, it's like, oof, it's tough to justify $70,000 for a Grand Cherokee, no matter how nice it is. Like a Mercedes GLE still will tow like over 7,000 pounds. So, I mean, it's not like this really has much of an edge with any of that kind of stuff, aside from offering that V8 engine. Those do offer V8 engines, but again, when you're in the German stuff with the V8s, you're talking about 6-figure cars, basically, almost at that point. But even if you do want a V8 engine, Dodge also offers the Durango, also within the Stellantis umbrella here. And the Durango, you can get several different V8 versions, one that's even more powerful than the one offered in this, and those still come in well under $70,000. So, you know, even if you want a V8 thing, I mean, obviously the Durango is not as luxurious as this is, so you're kind of getting a little bit of a trade-off there. But, you know, the fact is, if you want a V8 powered American SUV, you know, the Durango is still going to probably be the top pick there anyway. So, you know, it's hard to even justify the Grand Cherokee V8, you know, even in that context. So, just a tough case here for the Grand Cherokee value-wise. And if you do want something really off-road capable, you can even get a Land Rover Defender for $70,000 that won't have nearly as luxurious of an interior as this does, but it's a Land Rover, so it's, you know, a luxury branded thing, and the Defender has real off-road capability as well, just like the Grand Cherokee here. And the Land Rovers are sweet. They also do have a more powerful turbocharged 6-cylinder in the Defenders there in that $70,000 version. And so, you know, it definitely does not have as many features as this does, but still, again, when you're talking about 70 grand, there's a lot of really sweet options, even if you do want something that's off-road capable. So, you know, I mean, this is nice, and if you're a Jeep fan, this is probably really cool, but is it Land Rover Defender cool? Again, that's price subjective, but just want to throw another option out there as well you can get for $70,000. Just a little bit too much money, I think, you know, for what it is, but still is very, very nice nonetheless. But anyway, that's about it as far as all of my thoughts here on the Grand Cherokee. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. Huge thanks to Jeep for providing me here with the Grand Cherokee to review for you guys today. And yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.